Okay, hey, so I wasn't planning to make a video this morning, but I thought I would show you guys, and I apologize for the sound of my laptop, that it sounds like it's about to take flight if you can hear that on audio. But I wanted to show you really quickly a few things that I do when I edit photos. In case you're editing model photos or you have photos that you've taken of your models, the first thing you want to do is open them in Adobe Lightroom, actually. So I'm in Adobe Lightroom right now. It's part of the Adobe Creative Suite. You can download it with your Rice account. And the photo that came in is this photo here that I've taken, of Rosella's model. And there are a few things I do first before I even mess with the white balance, the tone, anything like that. I scroll down on my right side, and this is Lightroom Classic, I should say. And I prefer the Lightroom Classic interface just generally. But there's a section for transform here, and so I can hit auto, and that will automatically fix any perspective issues. Now, sometimes this doesn't work. If it doesn't work, you can also use this guided perspective correction, and it'll give you this zoom in where you can zoom in and choose, for instance, the very corner of this model and this corner. And then you'll want to pick something that's either parallel or perpendicular to it. So in this case, I'm going to choose the edge of this model, and it's going to just correct the perspective for me. You can use, I think, up to 4 or 5 guides to correct your perspective. So like I could also put one here on this edge and down through, and it'll just adjust it slightly. So that's the first thing. The second thing I do is I do check auto, just to see if like the tones that it gives me when I do auto are close to what I want. It's just like a sort of a lazy shortcut to start. I do notice that the whites here have been boosted and they seem a little too white to me. So I'm going to pull down my whites, and I actually like the rest of these. I tend to like a little bit more contrast with my architectural photos, so I might increase the contrast. Again, sometimes this gets it very wrong. The other things that you can increase here are your texture. So sometimes this is really nice. Like, so you see as if I pull the texture slider all the way up, it gives me a lot of texture, obviously, in the background and in the foreground. But it also helps give a lot of texture to the model. So you can choose if you want to increase or not the texture. The clarity is kind of like contrast. It pulls the darks down mostly and increases what feels like the texture, the contrast of the photo. And then dehaze is great, actually, not necessarily for this, but if you had a model that was in a really filmy area, or like if you're taking portraits and they're really filmy, and you want to remove some of the haze, this will basically pull the shadows up and down. Like it'll change the curve to make it less hazy, or you can add more haze. We have a very ethereal situation going on. So I'm going to put those back to 0. The auto for Adobe will typically automatically boost the vibrance and saturation of your colors. So depending on how much you want that to happen, you would adjust those as well. My dog is barking or is yawning, sorry about that. And then in the background here, somewhere that's got a neutral, I'm going to select the dropper for my white balance, and I'm going to choose my white balance. You can dropper it lots of different places. I like to pick somewhere that's a good mid-tone. You can see that depending on where I dropper this, shadows or otherwise, it's going to fall in a different place on the temperature curve. The other thing you can do is I have auto white balance applied in camera on my raw files, so they tend to come in pretty good. If I look at my as shot white balance, it's not bad. It's a little bit pink and yellow, and when I auto it does make it too yellow. So I might take that eyedropper and just pick down here in like a mid-tone to correct. Those are the primary things that I do when I'm looking. If you have a specific color you wanted to boost, you can boost the saturation, swap the hue. So for instance, with the orange that's on this, I could pull these oranges a little bit more red if that's a little bit more like closer to the color that they were, or if I want to boost the orange a little bit so that it's a little bit more dense in the photo, I can do that certainly. Or I can change the luminance. So this is the brightness, and I do think that this tends to make colors more pastel. I will tell you that the orange luminance slider is how you get glowy skin in a portrait photograph, just so you know. So I'm going to just set these all back to 0 because I think that they're fine, but you do want to pay attention to those colors. The other thing I wanted to show you really quickly is adjustment brushes in here. So there are a few. So the first one is the healing brush, which is the quick key for it is Q. And I can use this healing brush to replace, it's basically like an active clone stamp that you can move around, but to replace injured areas. You can see it's still pretty obvious because I would need to go through and do the entire edge of this. There's also if I go back here and look at this heel, you can change it to use AI to erase. Sometimes it does a nice job. Here it's done a nice job. Sometimes it does a terrible job. But you can play with those. I rarely ever use the actual literal clone stamp. I like to either spot heal or erase, depending, and usually the modeling for those Adobe does a pretty good job on. So you can see here, I've just removed some blemishes down here. I could remove these two particularly noticeable blemishes on the wall so that they're not super noticeable. In the Q menu, I can change the feather of this so that it's a little bit more blended in, and of course the size and then the opacity of the patch. I like to keep the opacity pretty high. If you're noticing like a circle around, you're going to want to adjust the feather so that it's a little bit less noticeable. You can also patch big areas of this. And if you don't like the source that the patch is coming from, you can move the source to somewhere else and see what that looks like. The other one is the adjustment brush that I use is over here, this far right one. I call it the K brush because the hotkey for it is K. It'll allow you to select, this is really amazing for portrait subject. It'll automatically, let's see if it does it actually for this. It's going to try to analyze and detect the subject. Oh, it did a pretty good job. So like, for instance, if I wanted my whites to be toned down in my model, but I didn't want them toned down in my background, I could pull whites down or increase my contrast. And that will start, like, this is really great for if you want to increase the texture of your model, but not the texture of the background. So that was, again, the K brush. And then the other thing I can do is I can just select, and I create a new mask brush. And then I can change any of these that I want. So say, for instance, that I wanted to increase the saturation, but only on my orange areas, I can brush this saturation mask on. Now, obviously, it's going to feather, and you can see when I hover over it where that mask is applied. If I wanted to warm this area up, I could, but you can see that there is some overflow happening here on the back of the wall. So you would want to be careful of how you brush these things. I can select this brush and delete it. If I go back into my Q menu, I can select any of these adjustments I've made and just click on them and delete them as well. So those are the two biggest brushes I use. And then there's obviously here a crop. I hit R, that's also crop menu. And I can adjust my crop so that everything is well balanced within this frame, or I can rotate it a little bit if I feel like the perspective is still off, just to get it exactly where I want it. So those are just a few quick tips with Lightroom, where you can do all of those things, play around with them without, I think it's a little bit easier because you can do and undo, replace, and really look at the differences here. Whereas with Photoshop, I feel like it's a layer process, and this is a little bit more intuitive, at least for me. I enjoy it much more. And then Photoshop, I really reserve just for very intense airbrushing, things that the Q brushes don't take care of. The other thing I would say from Lightroom is that you can then batch apply all of these changes to your next photo without having to save an automation. So I can hit Control-C on this and then select all of the adjustments, including the masking, including cropping or any healing brushes I use. And then I can paste them to my next photo if my next photo is identical. Actually, in this case, I don't think they are, but you can just copy and paste it over. It becomes very, very easy. When you're done, and you're looking at all your photos, so this is like your G menu. When you're in your G menu, instead of the developer palette, you can just hit export and it'll export it back to your desktop. And you can send all your images out that way. So just a few little tips. Happy to walk anyone through more advanced Lightroom tutorials if you want. or to start you on a beginner tutorial for Lightroom. But I did show this during a model workshop and had people go, oh my God, that's amazing. So I wanted to share it with all of you just in case it was helpful. Yeah, let me know if you have any questions. See if I can stop my recording.